Okay, welcome to part two of the new tea party. Take my mask off. Got the cameraman secured in his booth. And we still got to be a little careful with this mask for a while. If you can keep from breathing germs on somebody or inhaling germs from somebody else, it's probably a good idea. That's my experience anyway. Just got to clear the record. Last time we talked, I was referring to the 4 T's that you couldn't talk about in China. Actually, that's 3 T's: Taiwan, Tibet, and Tiananmen. And I think the freedom of speech was really quite refreshing in the most of the 20 years I was visiting China, because there wasn't a lot of political conflict. People were respectful of each other's opinions as long as you didn't directly criticize the government, and as long as you didn't state too many opinions about Taiwan, Tibet, and Tiananmen. Actually, there was quite a bit of free speech, and there wasn't people getting in your face all the time. How do you write about China without criticizing the government, and also be true to your own ideas if you disagree? And I'll give you an example. Now, why don't we switch to the computer? This is the website, tourguizhou.com, and I was reading an article about African American youths see the true China. And so I read this article, African American Youths See the True China by Yang Dong Ji, China Daily. And this was back in 2016. So I read that article, and here's the article. I don't know if it's still posted or not, but I read it and I thought, well, really gives you a slanted view of China. And I was going to write a rebuttal, and that's basically against my interests. If I want to keep from getting blocked, I don't want to criticize the local government too much. But then I got to thinking, well, what is the true China? The province in China that I was in was magnificent. People are friendly, beautiful landscape. So when I read a headline referring to the true China, it really set off a bell. The USA people always ask me, what's it like in China? My answer has always been the same. China's a big place. It's better to ask me what it's like in Guizhou or Guiyang. And I really wanted to address this this idea of the true China. But where I was at is still very rural. I actually participated in a guy's article in, I think it's Anthropology magazine, about the agricultural policy of China and things of that nature. But what is a true China? Is it agricultural or is it modern? And the article from China Daily took the African American kids to Shanghai and Beijing and the big technology events that they had. They didn't take them to a farm or anything and see how peasants live. So instead of criticizing the Chinese, I got to thinking, well, what would I write if somebody wanted to show the true USA to some Chinese kids coming to the U.S.? What would you show them? If I wanted to show people the true America, what would I show them? Perhaps I will try to lead a group to the U.S. and attempt to show them the true America. Well, that's pretty darn subjective, you know. Anyway, there's an article in there about what I would show people about America. Anyway, that's enough of that website. There's a lot of information in there. But the thing is, we have a real culture clash. Uh, but I'll never forget the impact of culture. Uh, it happened during that lockdown where I told you, you know, 5 or 6 weeks of lockdown where you could only go out once every other day and go grocery shopping. And at the time, we didn't know if you touch somebody, if you touch something, and then touch your nose, you have fomites that can infect you and actually make you sick just by touching a surface and then and touching your mouth or your nose or rubbing your eyes. So we were very, very afraid. And I went to a grocery store, and actually I got a mask from the police. Actually came over and gave me a mask, told me I should wear a mask if I went out. And I was in the grocery store, and I'm picking up fruit and putting it in a plastic bag. And I thought, darn, I've got to put this in the plastic bag. And my fingers were dry, so I couldn't really open up the plastic bag. And so I looked around. I'll never forget, is anybody watching me? And I slipped my finger up under the mask and wet my fingertip. And then I opened up the plastic bag and started to put the fruit in. And I thought, oh my God, I've just contaminated myself. I've been handling this fruit, and I just touched my fingertip to my tongue. And if there was any virus, my God, am I going to die? That could have done it. And then as I thought about it, I thought, what am I worried about? Am I worried about dying from the virus? Or am I worried about not being part of this group of people? Because in China, everybody was on the same page. Everybody was fighting the virus. And I had broken the unwritten rule. I cheated. I pulled my mask down and touched my finger to my tongue. And I was more worried about people seeing me breaking the rules than I was actually getting sick. And that's when I realized the power of culture. And when I came back to the U.S. and I saw this culture, it came down on two sides of trying to live as if the virus wasn't there, or trying to aggressively fight the virus. And we had a massive number of people that were fighting the virus, a massive number of people that were fighting the people fighting the virus. And it all came out, I remember this January 6th thing, when they, all of the congressmen were hiding in a group down on the floor, and there was a bunch of Democrats going, hey, you Republicans, you should put on your masks if you're going to get down on the floor with us. And the Republicans didn't want to. So even when they were under attack, they were still Republicans or Democrats and controlled by their culture. And right now, at least in the last few months that I've been here, and actually I've been back in the U.S. for a year now, there's very little communication going on between the different parties. You know, for a long time they were saying, "Not my president," and they were talking about, well, Trump is not my president, and I would always look at him and say, "You're an American, right? We all elect a president. He's your president, whether you like it or not. He's your president." So I'd get in arguments with Democrats, and now I'm having the same problem with the Republicans. They say, well, Biden's not my president. You know, he's not my I didn't vote for him. He's not my president. Well, I'm sorry, but we only have one president, and he belongs to all of us. So anyway, that's that's a little bit of my political persuasion here. Uh, we need a strategy for dealing with the different cultures, not just between China and the U.S., but also between the Republican Democratic Party. Actually, you can't criticize anybody anymore without somebody aggressively attacking you. And I would say the Chinese Communist Party, Republican Party, and the Democratic Party are basically about the same on that issue. If you disagree with them, you're ripe for personal attack.
And go ahead.
All right. The thing I want to get into today is what do you do during a pandemic? And we've changed our culture. This pandemic has changed our culture. I want to share with you. My grandfather was in his 80s last time I saw him, and he had fallen and had hurt his hip, and he had been trying to go to the barber shop on a glazed ice day, and he fell down. And so I asked him, when did you go to the barber shop last? And he looked down at me with my father's eyes, basically the same eyes I have. And he said, 1918. I said, 1918? Yeah, I'll never forget that year. That was a terrible year. I was sick with the flu, and I was laying on the couch, and my wife was in the bedroom, and she was yelling at me to come be with me. And I couldn't move. I couldn't get up and go there. And then she died. And I remember I talked to my father about that event. My father was the oldest son. And he said the last thing his mother said to him was, you be a good boy. And that stayed with him right up to, he was in his 70s when he told me that. But my aunt, his sister, told me that my grandfather got very mean after his wife died, and actually was quite mean to my father, who was the oldest. And he had the responsibility for kind of raising a family because my grandfather lost his interest in working hard and being a family man. So my father took on a big burden because of that pandemic in 1918. And when people are always talking about how we're going to get back to normal after this pandemic, well, there is no getting back to normal. I'm sorry. From what I've seen, this is just as bad as it was in 1918. And we've lost a lot of people already. And the economy has suffered a lot. We've had more shocks. If you can imagine, we had World War I and the pandemic in 1918. We've got the pandemic this year. We've also got the trade war situation where we don't trade. We used to be a trading country, a big trading country, and that's responsible for the creation of a lot of wealth. When you can get people working around the world and doing what they're good at, and that creates a lot of wealth. And meanwhile, when you stop trading, that destroys a lot of wealth. And this country has stopped trading with a lot of people in a lot of ways, and we've lost a lot of money, big time money. So when you talk about Trump did this and Biden did that, well, you're really talking about a contraction in the world economy that's massive. There's a lot of places that have not been able to fight the virus, and their workforce is shrinking because there's a lot of sick people there. There still is. Um, so as far as getting back to normal, you got kids that have got to get back into school and learn how to study again. Uh, that's a major change. That's going to change those kids' lives forever. Just like the pandemic that my father lived through when he lost his mother, uh, that changed his life forever. Some tremendous traumas. And I talked about being homeless. Well, it was a big deal. When I was in China, I had basically at 2015, I was told I couldn't teach anymore, and I stayed there on a tourist visa. And I did some, shall we say, illegal immigrant labor, where I taught people who wanted to learn English, and even though I wasn't permitted as a teacher, nobody really pursued it. But I was living life as a tourist, and I was not supposed to be teaching kids. Well, I had kids coming over visiting me in my apartment, and it was a nice little middle-class existence. And the kids were learning their English. And the thing that I thought was important was the culture, working on the culture and teaching American culture. And I used movies and things of that nature. But we've really got to try to learn from each other. The Chinese have a lot of things that they can teach us. And then we've got a lot of things we can teach the Chinese too. So I think that having been in government, I was really disappointed in the quality of the auditing that you get from the government. You have accounting companies that audit the government. That's a big part of their business. But they don't really criticize the people that they're auditing because they want to get hired the following year. You have trouble with other things that professionals and the work they do for the government. Well, China doesn't have a lot of those problems because when it comes time to audit each other, they take people from one city that are in charge of the accounting, and those people go to another city, and they do the audit on the other city. So it's not an outside auditing company that's paid. It's actually members of the government audit each other. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. They can share ideas that way, but they also don't have to worry about getting hired again. So it's a communist way of doing their auditing that makes sure the audits get done right. Well, anyway, that's a small thing, but there's a lot of things that Chinese, U.S. are modern governments now, and we're dealing with the same issues. And how do they deal with each other? And when you're communicating, you can learn from each other. Right now, we're not learning anything except how to complain. And I think I mentioned in the last video that, yeah, there's a lot of complaints. Fortunately, I had this app on my phone called Audiobooks. And you can read any book you want, only it's read to you. And you can go about your business and do what you want to do and listen to the book. And during this pandemic time between, well, first let me back up. The state of Michigan prevented me from practicing the real estate appraisal profession. So when I got back, not only was I broke and living in an office, but I really couldn't work because for 16 weeks, the state of Michigan held up my certification. I'm a certified general appraiser, and eventually in July I finally did get into the business, but that left me close to 6 months of not being able to work in the appraisal profession. Uh, so anyway, I had my share of troubles too. But in reading the books, I noticed some history books. One is called Stillwell and the American Experience. I'll give you the actual. But Joseph Stillwell was a general in U.S. Army, and he was very fluent in Chinese. He spent from the early 1900s right up through World War II managing American affairs in China. And what I got out of that book, it was about Stillwell in China mostly, and we had 50,000 American missionaries in China. The West has sent missionaries to China for a long time, but we've got a special relationship with the Chinese. We've had American missionaries there for a lot of years, and I have a friend. His name's Ray Mahoney. I hope to get him on this video going forward. He's got about 25 years in China. He's fluent in Chinese. I've got, I would say maybe 13 years of living in China, and I'm not fluent, but I am functional in Chinese. But we have been promoting not just ourselves as teachers, but really promoting American culture and American values to the Chinese. And I've attended church ceremonies with Chinese, but mostly I had 3 years of teaching English at the college level, where I showed American movies. And these were promoting American culture. And I had a dean of instruction that was very supportive of teaching about American movies as a tool so the kids could learn English, but could also learn values, because these movies are universal values. How men and women relate, what happens in wars, what about history from American perspective. I showed them Apollo 13 and a lot of movies that dealt with problems that young people deal with. And it was a very good way of indoctrinating young Chinese into becoming adults and the values that they're going to need when they become adults, and from an American perspective. So that's what we did, and Ray Mahoney helped me with that. He's an old China hand. But that General Stillwell book told me the difference in culture. They had a guy named Chiang Kai-shek, who was in charge of the Chinese nationalists, and he was fighting the communists. And I didn't realize it, but the Americans actually stopped Chiang Kai-shek from wiping out the Communist Party, because there was a war with Japan, and we wanted the communists to fight the Japanese along with the nationalists, and the U.S. was fighting over there too. So we wanted all three groups to fight the Japanese, when really the Chinese were divided, and really they didn't know if they wanted to fight the Japanese or wanted to fight with each other. You know, finding a way, that's a common problem for all these political groups. Another book that from the audiobooks that I read that was very interesting was the personal memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant. He talked about the situation of going into the Civil War and what the political situation was going into the Civil War. Now, back then, private property was just as important now as it was then. Well, vice versa. Private property was very important. In the South, private property included the ownership of other human beings. And there had to be a civil war because both sides would not compromise. There was no way of working it out. And a lot of people think that we should have just let the South go. But slaves were escaping from the South all the time and going into the North. And then the slave owners were hiring people to go into the North to kidnap the former slaves and bring them back to the South. It was a really tough situation. The country was very divided. So this is not the first time that we've been divided. So that's what I learned from reading these books. And the last book I thought was very interesting was called Ghost of Fleet. And that postulates U.S. and China going to war with each other, and what would happen? What kind of weapon systems would be employed? And how would it work out? And at the beginning of the book, you realize that China and the U.S. are in a war, and they decided not to use nuclear weapons because they knew all life on Earth would end. So it turned out to be something of a conventional war. And it's a very realistic kind of a war, and it's kind of exciting the way they framed it. So I thought that was a good book, and I would recommend those to you. But these kind of divisions can be handled by talking and working it out. What's the difference between having a few million people dead and then learning to live together, or just learning to live together without all the killing? In the end, if you're going to survive, you've got to learn to live together. There was another book about Woodrow Wilson and how he tried to keep the Americans out of World War I. But it didn't work out, because public opinion controlled. The politicians follow the public. Now, sure, you have politicians setting public opinions, but when the American people didn't want to go to war, we didn't go to war. When they got angry at Germany, we went to war. And that's what's happening. It's a very common thing. Public opinion controls the politicians, especially in a democracy. So I think the more insults we have with each other, the more we're inclined to insult each other. And that's not the politicians. That is the people themselves that are self-destructing. So I think we've got to take a good look at each other and understand that everybody has a good reason for what they believe. And in your democracy, we're supposed to listen to what other people have to say and not insult them, because that stops the communication. We don't have a dictator that's going to run the government for us if we can't decide what to do. This system of government depends on the people getting involved